Welcome everyone to our closing session. I'm Mike Howard from the US Basic Income Guarantee Network. I'm going to follow the good example of many of our Canadian colleagues and acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from Bangor, Maine, on the traditional land of the Wabanaki people and the banks of the still contested Penobscot River. I'm going to guide us through a few different parts of this culminating session. In this session, we will identify pillars for building a basic income movement and their tie to this year's NABIG theme. We're going to hear from BI leaders and organizations in the US and Canada about how they build coalitions and hear highlights and reflections from the three-day NABIG Congress as they align with these pillars. The session will close with upcoming events and actions across North America during the second half of 2021. Let me now introduce Stacey Rutland to talk to us about the pillars of building a basic income movement.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. Really happy to be here. Happy to be able to say what a fantastic and exciting 3 days of conversations, of learning opportunities that this Congress has managed to kind of pull together. We've had a really great 3 days. I think everything that the committee over the last several months was hoping would happen has absolutely happened and maybe even exceeded some of our expectations. At a very high level, before I jump into the pillars and a little bit about the theme that we had this year for this Congress, we just looked at our numbers. We had 640 people register for this event, which is about maybe almost a solid 3 times the size of any previous Congresses. I think this is really a reflection of a couple of things. Of course, that this is virtual, so more people have access to it, which I think is a great learning for the committee, thinking about what future Congresses might look like. But then, of course, also it's a reflection of the incredible growth that we've seen in North America, in our respective countries, towards the work of building movements for basic income legislation. So really just in awe of everything that has happened over these days, and really having a great appreciation for everybody who showed up, everybody who presented, who brought really compassion, thought leadership, and their own kind of time and energy to make this really great program happen. So what we're going to do today, Mike did a really good job of at a high level walking us through the things that we'll cover. The first hour or so really will be a conversation around where we are and what's kind of led into and up to this moment. And then we'll spend a little bit of time reflecting and then thinking about next steps for the last half hour. So I thought that it would be useful for us to do a little bit of a level set together around what our theme was this year for the 19th annual NABIG Congress, and then start to talk a little bit more about what that means, why we chose this theme, and then also what that means to the work that's been happening and the work that's going to continue to happen. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time because I'm sharing slides, and this is the first time I've shared slides during this conference. I try to not go down that route as much as possible, but I think that these would be helpful. I also have a dog in the background. I think like the mailman is here or something because she's going crazy. So I apologize if you're hearing a dog going a little nuts in the back. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. This will probably just take 5 minutes or so, but I think it's a good level set for us all, and some background and context for why we are all here together today. So let me share my screen. Okay, I'm not going to make it go full screen because I'm using multiple monitors and it gets a little bit nutty. Okay, so one of the things that in the early stages that the committee, when we were thinking about what is it that we want to do this year, and what is that going to look like? And of course, the reflection of that is, what is our theme? We talked a lot about the desire to have, last year there wasn't a Congress because the pandemic had just hit, and there just really wasn't enough time to pivot and think about what a virtual experience might look like. And really, it was early on enough in the pandemic that even a lot of the tools that we used here during this really amazing 3 days didn't exist or were not publicly available. So there's a lot less options and opportunities to have kind of a cool and engaging experience. So last year it didn't happen, and that means it's been 2 years since this Congress has come together. And of course, it's been a pretty impactful 2 years, a pretty significant 2 years of growth across the continent. And so really, as we talked more, it became clear that we wanted this to reflect the growth. We wanted what we focused on this year to be reflective of the movement from kind of policy or details about how would you pay for this into the larger expansion of what has happened in our movement. So really, we wanted it to reflect how the movement has been built and be able to bring all those voices together that have been working in that space. So our theme was basic income knowledge, activism, and policy. It's pretty big. It's quite an umbrella, but these do align with the 3 key pillars to successful movement building. And I mentioned this a little bit at the top of the last policy and political champ keynote, that there's really tends to be these kind of 3 larger pillars to building movements. There's thought leadership, grassroots advocacy, and the political side of things, policy and champs. And so we really wanted to make sure that with this year's theme, we were being very intentional at thinking about presentations from people in each of these different areas, and also thinking about who would be likely to attend and making sure there was something there for everybody. So you see that, and we'll talk a little bit towards the end of this hour, reflections of these themes and these pillars in the sessions themselves, and do a little bit of kind of calling out of great opportunities for people, if they missed good conversations, to be able to go back and watch any of the sessions that are still exciting and of interest to them. So within these pillars, there's very specific things that happen, right? And this is going to be a very simple and high level thing, because I just want to use it as a foundation, like I said. In thought leadership, there's social justice collaboration, so social justice organizations, building those relationships, inviting deep partnership is essential to coalition building. Basic income coordination, this is organizations that are already bought into it, but making sure that they're all kind of coming together on the same page, maybe not doing the same work, maybe not even working towards the same policy or the same exact specific goal, but understanding what's on each other's roadmaps, understanding what are opportunities to come together and to push when we all need to push together to make a big leap forward together. Educational events, pilot strategies and research. Obviously, pilot strategies and research and some of these things immediately and most definitely feed into policy and some of these other components. On grassroots advocacy, you have deep advocacy. We talked actually quite a bit about this in the last keynote that we had with the awesome leadership out of Canada, the important role of conversations, how to have those conversations, how to bring more people into the fold, whether they're elected officials or your neighbors. Community growth, celebration events, political pressure, and cross-org collaboration. These are all things that need to continue to just be fueled at the grassroots level. And then there's on the political side, policy and building of champs. That's policy collaboration, building members of Congress, champs that are already elected and in office, and then of course supporting candidates who are working in this space, who are campaigning on a platform and leaning hard into guaranteed income and basic income policies. So pillars are pretty much so. It's very easy when you look at these to start thinking about these as kind of silos. But I think one of the things that it's been really inspiring to hear over the course of these 3 days is just how much interconnectedness there actually is within these three. And even though they are pillars, they're not siloed. And the more that we don't think of them that way, and the more we think about like, what are the opportunities of overlap? Where are the opportunities for partnership? And ultimately, who are the people that we want to make sure are in the room when important decisions, important events, whatever they are, happen, means that there's got to be pretty regular communication and collaboration. And finding those ideal moments of overlap is really critical. So I think that collaboration really is what that's about. And for the conversation that we have today, collaboration is our theme. We want to be able to talk about how collaboration across these pillars and organizations that are working in a lot of different areas, how they work together, how they come together, and what the impact of that is on the work that we're seeing. So in some ways, this is a little bit of an opportunity to kind of look, pull the curtain aside and see how does the sausage get made? How is what we're seeing publicly around the movements and the growth of the movement, how is that actually happening behind the scenes? And what does that coordination look like? So we'll be hearing from people that are leading organizations in Canada and the US to just talk a little bit more about what the last 12 months has looked like on the collaboration space across these pillars. And really, this is about those high impact initiatives, making sure that when we're stronger together, we come together. And that we know when those opportunities are. There is also, and I mentioned this a little bit at in one of the previous sessions, I believe, but this idea of needing to be very conscious of that there's tension across some of these at different times, and that's okay. Grassroots advocacy, often what the people are demanding are things that might not be politically viable. This was something that came up quite a bit during the the session that asked about should we fight for universality and what's politically feasible versus what it is that we think philosophically we should be fighting for. So sometimes there's tension there. It doesn't mean that collaboration isn't an important piece, but also it may mean that it's important to have unique organizations that are focused exclusively in some of these domains, because it allows them to be the kind of advocates for their communities and for their goals that are necessary. So just keeping those things in mind. We're not necessarily talking here about, a kumbaya, everybody's together on every single initiative and effort, and everybody's, going all in on the same efforts, but knowing when are those opportunities to come together, when are we going to be most impactful, but also when is it important for us to stay kind of independent, because that allows, that can have strong impact for the movement as well, and have it help us be more effective with the communities that we're working in. So I think that we've seen a lot throughout. Even though our theme has been around these three areas, the collaboration piece really has come through in some of the most kind of interesting and exciting moments of this 3-day event. And so right now, what we're going to do is we're going to celebrate some of that collaboration, call it out very specifically, talk about what that has looked like. And then we're also going to be asking ourselves and asking each other to challenge ourselves to continue to do that work. And we'll give you guys some opportunities, if you're as inspired as we are and as excited as we are about what's been happening over these 3 days, some opportunities for us to kind of take it into the next months, certainly through the next, through this year and into next. Okay, that's plenty of that. And now I'm going to have to find my sharing icon, sorry. Okay, there we go. So this framework is just a helpful framework for us as we have this conversation. I'm going to start inviting community members up to the stage so that we can start having some of these conversations around collaboration. We're going to start first in the US. And so I'll introduce a I think I'm going to introduce all of us. So I think we should all be up on the stage together, even though we're going to talk with the US people first, and then we'll talk with the Canadian community as well. So first I'm going to introduce Madeline Naley. She's from Economic Security Project. And I'm going to get to the intro section. Okay, Madeline is Director of Guaranteed Income at Economic Security Project. She's also co-chair of the Guaranteed Income Community of Practice, which is a coalition designed to provide learning opportunities and best practices for running guaranteed income demonstrations, while also pushing new ideas in the direct cash space and developing a coordinated national field. The GICP is fantastic and exciting. I know that she's going to talk a little bit more about that. Prior to joining ESP, she was a director of advocacy and policy at the Roosevelt Institute, where she focused on corporate power issues. Welcome, Madeline. Great to have you here.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
We also have Giselle Huff, which we all had the pleasure of hearing from in our previous keynote. She is, if you weren't able to catch that session, she's president of the Gerald Huff Fund for Humanity. She lost her son, Gerald, to pancreatic cancer in 2018, which spurred Dr. Huff to apply her talents and energy to a cause that they both shared: concern about technological unemployment, the growing economic divide, and the potential of UBI to help address these challenges on a broad scale. Dr. Huff served as San Francisco University High School's Director of Development for 12 years and Executive Director for the Jacqueline Hume Foundation for over 20 years. Now, Giselle is also one of, and Fund for Humanity is one of the major sponsors for the Basic Income March. She helped make sure that the first one was the success that it was, and every year keeps coming back to make sure that that it grows year in and year out. So really happy to have you here, Giselle. And then the third person from the US that we want to bring up to the stage is John Ma. John is a project and product manager, ops director, team facilitator, and community organizer working in the for-profit and nonprofits and community spaces. He holds a Master's of Arts in process-oriented facilitation and conflict studies, a trauma-informed and post-union approach to leading toward consensus in business, family, and community settings amidst cultural and historical differences. He's an organizer for Level Up, the newly christened grassroots organization born from the California Yang Gang, as well as Ground Game in Los Angeles. John was recently elected member of LA City's West Adams Neighborhood Council, heading up emergency preparedness, vaccine awareness, and outreach to the community's unhoused neighbors. So John is pretty much, so I don't know how he does it all in a day. He's got a lot going on, but we're so happy to have you here, John. We also have Ken Yang from UBI Works in Canada. Ken manages media and content at UBI Works, a Canadian nonprofit on a mission to make basic income a key federal election issue and to see it implemented nationwide. We love UBI Works. We work with them all the time. So happy to have Ken here. Ken co-organized the first Basic Income March in Toronto in 2019 and has since helped grow UBI Works network to 80,000 plus activists. Woohoo! That's fantastic. And he previously worked in corporate governance research at Canadian law firm Davies LLP, social cognition research at the University of Toronto, and managed the commercialization of early stage technology from the university. Awesome to have you here, Ken.
Thank you, Stacey. It's great to have you. Good to be here.
And then, yes, thank you. And then last, but certainly not least, I realized that I didn't actually ask Jenna how to pronounce her last name, so I'm going to butcher it, and then she's going to correct me. So Jenna Van Drainen, okay. Jenna is the co-chair of the Basic Income Canada Network. We've had the pleasure of being able to hear from and see her co-compatriot Sheila in some of these different sessions. She's a member and is a member of Coalition Canada. In her day job, she's an assistant professor at the University of Washington in the School of Nursing and the School of Public Health. Her current research looks at the role of poverty in shaping trajectories of mental health and substance use disorders. Wonderful to have you all here. Thank you for joining us in this last conversation. The last for these 3 days. not the last. That felt like a Last Supper kind of statement, but that's not what I'm saying. So let's go ahead and start to talk a little bit about what collaboration looks like. How are we building a movement together in our respective countries? What does that look like? And I would love to first just talk a little bit with Madeline around the work that's happening at Economic Security Project. So ESP has, we're going to use the acronym ESP. So and that's Economic Security Project, just so that you all know what we're referencing. They've really taken the lead on considerable collaboration of organizations and leaders across the guaranteed income space. There's two things that come to mind specifically for me. One is the Guaranteed Income Community of Practice that you are co-chairing and helped found. The second is what's called the Cash War Room. That's really about kind of bringing together a coalition of organizations around building policy for direct cash born out of the pandemic and trying to get more money to more people. Do you want to touch a little bit on both of those?
Sure. So ESP has long really thought of itself as a convener. That's one of the things that we do and do well. And when the coronavirus pandemic hit, we both pivoted our campaigns team from thinking about modernization and expansion of the earned income tax credit to include folks who have been excluded from it, like unpaid caregivers and low-income students without dependents. So we pivoted from expansion there to think, okay, we know this is coming. We know that tying cash to work, particularly at this moment, is going to be devastating for communities, because even very early on, we recognized that a global pandemic was going to shut down economies. So our cost of living refund team quickly transitioned to become the Emergency Money to the People campaign. But at the same time, how do you convene people in a global pandemic that really was a test for all of us? So our campaigns team, which is run by Adam Rubin and great folks that Stacey works very closely with, really, had to shift into this mindset of we need to do a lot of organizing of folks online and create space for people who hadn't seen cash as their main fight to take it up in this moment. So, providing the resources and information that organizations who traditionally hadn't seen guaranteed income or cash as their focus could really glom onto and see, okay, in this moment, the communities we care about, this is what they need right now. And this is a group that has long been working on this and will help us step by step do what we need to do to advocate for that in this moment. So the Emergency Money to the People was working for recurring cash payments through the pandemic and economic recovery. Really concrete goal. Really easy to, get folks in the room and talk about how this can help so many various communities. As we all know, everyone's individual needs are individual and cash is a universal solution. And so it really did open up opportunities for people who hadn't seen themselves in the cash fight to come on board. We're still workshopping the name a year later, Cash War Room, which is very campaign-y, but also super violent and weird. So that is the Cash War Room. They're still active now. They have really transitioned in the US. The American Rescue Plan expanded the child tax credit so that it is functionally a guaranteed income for people with children. However, that was a one-year expansion. So the campaigns team and the Cash War Room is really focused right now on ensuring that that is permanent. We really see that as the fight that folks can dig into at this moment and get a guaranteed income for some people past in the long term.
Can I say something before you move on to the guarantee?
Always.
Okay. The one thing that, Income Movement has been in those weekly meetings really since you guys kicked it off, which I think it was maybe a week or two after the pandemic hit. It was amazing.
We were talking, I was still in the office when we were like, we have to do this. We have to transition now. And I was like, also, I'm peacing out and taking my computer and I don't know when I'm going to see you guys again.
The thing that that has been so inspirational for us, and I think for others who have been working hard in the basic income community, was to see how many different organizations are part of that. It's you know, people like Children's Defense Fund, people who are working in housing, healthcare, people who have been doing this work, People's Action, you know, people that are doing a lot of work on the ground in the field as well as in policy, that have never taken on direct cash before, but in the moment of the pandemic knew this is what we have to do. And so it really was, you know, we know when we look at what's happening with, you know, politicians and legislation and policy, that there was a huge kind of opportunity here. But there was also, it really feels very exciting how many new people came to cash and stayed. I mean, they're still every week getting together to do this work. And it's really, I think, an important thing for people in the community who haven't had a chance to actually witness that, to know, you know, that's 50 to 75 organizations getting together every single week to talk about how can we challenge all of our connections on the Hill, every person we have a relationship with, to get more checks out to people, which has just been fantastic.
Yeah, I think there's a couple reasons why it's working now, and that is because the pandemic upended things, right? It changed the landscape, and so finding those moments of positive transformation from this have been really important. So it gave us an opportunity to talk about cash to folks who maybe hadn't seen it as their fight. The other is, and I think you were talking about this earlier, at ESP, we see this not as the solution, but one of. So we can have housing groups there because we also support Housing First Solutions. We can have folks that you know, their work is on X, because we see that also as part of the transformation to a society that we want. So it's allowed collaboration in new ways, which I think is going to, over the long run, help all of us. Because it isn't leave your org's mission at the door and only come here. It is about how are we building this for long-term transformational change, where we can see the ways in which all of our fights can support each other. So the second kind of field shaping work and field supporting work we're doing is the Guaranteed Income Community of Practice, which I think we kind of have to step back and talk about another organization, which is Mayors for a Guaranteed Income. So as most folks may know, ESP was the first and largest supporter of Mayor Michael Tubbs' Stockton Economic Empowerment Demonstration. And that is one of the ways in which we think about change, is to provoke big ideas and legitimize them with champions. So that's really my role as the director of Guaranteed Income, is to think about doing that. How do we do that? And we had made this big bet to invest in Stockton as provoking a big idea and legitimizing it with a mayor who has gone all in and is out there as just this amazing champion, right? So we were thrilled to partner with Mayor Tubbs when he launched Mayors for a Guaranteed Income with 11 mayors in June of last year. It's up to over 50 now, not all of whom are running demonstrations in their cities, but all of whom have agreed to advocate for a federal guaranteed income, which me moving from pilots to policy is really the push. And so very thrilling. That is awesome, amazing, and insufficient to support a field that, again, has exploded during the pandemic, where we recognize that there are non-mayoral policymakers engaged in this fight. There are community-based organizations. There are all sorts of folks who are running demonstrations, evaluating them, funding them, touching guaranteed income in some way. And we wanted to create a space for folks to learn from one another. So Aisha Yandaro of Magnolia Mothers Trust and I came together along with our senior strategist, Hope Wolensack, to develop the Guaranteed Income Community of Practice. We now have over 230 folks from around the US. A couple Canadians are somehow slipped in. And we meet monthly to talk guaranteed income, to try to help each other with learning. So we don't propose to be the experts and have all of the answers, but we are building the field together. So every second Tuesday of the month, we come together for an hour and a half and talk through some ideas. Sometimes we have folks that have the answers. Sometimes we're just raising the questions and hoping that the community itself can answer it. One of the most important parts of the community is that Aisha and I cannot and do not want to be the central hub of communication. This is a community, so that all of those experts and questions and problem solving happen in a community, and you can use the Slack channel to reach out to other folks grappling with the same issue. There are smaller tables being built for New York folks and California folks, and what's happening in the Midwest, or how does the South really talk about this in a way that's very different than what resonates in New York or California. So we, as Aisha said, we host a container, we hold room and create space for the community there to grow, which I think is really empowering and has been a great experience.
Awesome. And those convenings that you hold every month, they're the topics that it's usually one topic, and you go pretty deep into it. And I think, things that have come up during these 3 days, asking questions about the benefits cliffs, like with all these different pilots that are running, what's the impact? How do you minimize that? And you bring together, people like from the Federal Reserve who have created tools to help figure out what the impact of your pilot might have on your local specific state, requirements for existing social safety net programs and things like that. Like very, very useful, tactical, logistics oriented best practice, as well as the philosophical and messaging and all of that. It's been really awesome to hear and see, and to see how many people are coming kind of hyper locally to this issue, and which is really wonderful to see. And I think even we had a session here, I believe, I can't remember if it was yesterday or today, around micro pilots and grassroots organizers who are like, I've got a little chunk of money, and we're gonna do 5 people in my community for the next 6 months or the next year. And that's how it's like, because I can make that happen. This big thing that the mayors are doing to 1,000 people, I can't do, but I can do something like this. And the community of practice is fantastic, because it's about anybody coming forward. We all face a lot of the same issues when you're wanting to dive into this, whether it's 3 people or 5 people or 1,000. So it's just been a great resource for a really wide range of kind of grassroots all the way to, administrators of larger budgets. Thank you, Madeline, and thank you, Economic Security Project, for everything that you guys are doing. It's fantastic. I'd love to get Giselle in this conversation and hear a little bit more about Fund for Humanity. You started to talk about this actually in the policy and political chance conversation around, and some people in the audience actually really wanted to understand, how do you focus, how, what is it that is important to you, as far as where you want to build partnerships, where you want to collaborate. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what Fund for Humanity has been doing, and kind of what you're seeing on your roadmap for collaboration and partnership.
So in my previous life, when I was the director of development of the Jack McNune Foundation for 22 years, I gave away $4 million a year. So I was known as the queen of ROI, because compared to the Gates Foundation, who gave away hundreds of millions of dollars a year in education, we were small potatoes. But I was able to make startup investments that then were adopted by other people, and that my ability to weed those out, to find them, and then to promote them at the right moment with not very great amounts of money, is what I'm trying to do in this space as well, because I know how to do it. I'm a big believer that nothing happens without money. So when you hear all the wonderful things that Madeline was just describing, those are not volunteer, or I mean, the people who come are volunteers, but the people who convene and the people who are doing all this work, they're getting paid. And when I look at the space, I see 2 funders. I see Jack Dorsey, who overlaps somewhat with ESP, and Chris Hayes, who was the original person who with Natalie Foster started ESP. If we're going, so we have to build a movement that is equivalent to the climate change movement. I mean, we have to build a movement that has enough power as a narrative so that we get the kind of financial support that these big causes have, which is why they move forward. Everything, I mean, the march, this Congress, you know, I'm investing in these activities because they're at the level of money that I can afford. But in the bigger picture, we need to mobilize big money. Now, it's going to take a long time. I'm not going to see it in my lifetime, but it's inevitable. UBI is going to happen. But we need to grease the wheels, and the only way you can do that is with money. So part of what I think our, the grassroots movement, all the people involved who are proponents of this have to do is to be ambassadors to give heft to the movement so that it becomes big enough to attract the kind of financial support that social justice movements and, the climate change is a very big one, where many foundations and individuals invest a great deal of money and are able to create organizations that are run by and helped with by people who get paid. Right. I mean, this is wonderful. I look at, John, and he comes out of a completely volunteer organization. It continues to be volunteer. Well, you can go just so far with that, and not far enough.
Well, and I think one of the things that I love, Giselle, about Fund for Humanity is that when you're very strategic and tactical about thinking, what are the things that are going to establish enough of the infrastructure, enough public facing events and activities and actions that can get that are proofs, basically proofs of concept or proof points for bigger funders. How do you, and recognizing that this isn't about, you don't have to have millions and millions of dollars to be able to have high impact and to have the spotlight, go appropriately to the work that's happening on the ground, so that larger funders see that not only as, it's always amazing when you're having a conversation with funders and they're like, wait, you just did that for how much money? How you were able to roll that out? Some of what you're saying, Giselle, of your experience in the, previously at the fund that you ran in education, when you can show the return on investment with something very small, if you target the right initiatives, you target the right organizations, the right people, you can, that's just the first most important step towards opening opportunities and doors for more funding. And you've just been phenomenal. Like, your little radar of where to go is pretty fantastic.
Well, I just want to give you one, because it was really quite, in the education world, we were trying to get people to understand what the power of blended learning is, this was in 2010, 2011. And in the same way, we're trying to show what the power of UBI is. It's the same kind of, endeavor. No one knew a whole lot about blended learning or how you use technology in education. And the Hume Foundation made over a 3-year period a $550,000 investment in 3 different examples of how blended learning worked. And it ended in 2011. And in 2011, the Gates Foundation invested $40 million in replicating what we did. So this is how this works. There's no other way for this to work. So everyone involved in the movement has to give the impetus for it to achieve that visibility that will unleash the kind of funding and professionalism and paid staff that are needed in order to make this idea a reality.
That's right. Well, I think it's a great time to bring John into this conversation, because you called out specifically, like, so much of the work that John and others in his organizations are doing is volunteer based and incredibly important work. It's also a good, I think John mentioned at the top of the hour, and I'll also say Madeline, I know, has another engagement with her child obligation, so she might be bouncing off in just a moment. So thank you, Madeline, for being here, for sharing.
Thank you. There's no fire alarm going on, so I'm good for another few minutes.
Awesome. So John, I think you mentioned it when or maybe I mentioned, I can't remember, that Level Up was born out of the California Yang Gang, and there's the Humanity First movement that was really kind of the Yang Gang coming out of Andrew Yang's presidential campaign, and kind of making some decisions about, like, well, how do we want to move forward with parts of the platform, UBI being one of those kind of most significant parts. How do we take a campaign into a movement? How do we keep this energy going? Because of course, there's so much grassroots energy that was born, from that campaign. And so, California Yang Gang was one of those, kind of regional offshoots that happened. And then that moved into what is now the newly christened Level Up California, which is fantastic. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about the evolution that you're seeing happen in California at the grassroots level, and how coalition building has played an important part of that.
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. It's actually really interesting. I'm glad that Giselle, you spoke first and level set a little bit, because we really wouldn't be here today if it weren't the work that you started. For example, the work you did with Senator Cortese, State Senator Cortese in California, to get him to be championing foster youth UBI, first at the county level, making a small splash to make a difference there. And then a huge splash, him coming out on the California state level and saying, let's do what we did there, let's do it here for the state, right? 2,500 foster youth transitioning out of foster care. Literally this is a UBI pilot that's going to touch every foster youth at the age of 21 coming out of foster care. This is unprecedented, right? This is like, gosh, like, how exciting is this? Really, it's that energy that is fueling so much of the conversation on the ground, right? We are all reacting and responding to the possibilities and the opportunities that folks on this panel have created. So much of it is that. There's also a component I'll talk about where we're the bottom-up originators of new ideas, new ways of being. That's also very important. But both of these things, I think, are really what community organizing is about: being opportunistic, right? Capitalistic, almost, in our mindset around what is the opening, and then being strategic about attacking it. And then at the same time, creating that space like Aisha is doing, like Madeline are doing, that actually creates a new flavor of agency. We talk about making the dead walk. That's sort of the throwaway phrase that came out of the 60s, I believe, in community organizing work, right? Making the dead walk. Those who have given up hope, those who have seen themselves forever on the periphery, who don't even consider themselves American by creed in some cases, as we're seeing so much in the reckoning today, and how do we begin to help those folks come to life in a unified way, and actually let them breathe their version of life, which feels so alien and sometimes even evil or wrong or backwards to us, and letting us bring that energy into the room, and taking, what I've seen in other spheres, say a homeopathic dose, right? Just that small, infinitely diluted piece that actually transforms the entire liquid when it comes through. Now, I'm not necessarily a fan of alternative medicine in all its forms. The analogy, I think, is a great one. So that being said, just to give you a sort of a level set on where we are as Level Up California, we came out of the Yang campaign just sad. I mean, there was a lot to work through feelings-wise. This was for many of us, the first time we'd gone so far into a campaign. Many of us had traveled out of state, had given up jobs even to go and be a part of this man's coalition. And we didn't get nearly as far as where we thought we were going to get, right? Just we stopped far short of where we thought we were going to be. It was a serious reckoning for all of us, and it was a decision we had to make as an organization around, well, what now? It wasn't a clean process. The pandemic actually helped in a lot of ways because it allowed us to stay in close community with each other. But ultimately, the decision was made around, let's model ourselves after what we're seeing on the ground as the reality around, a lot like Andrew Yang did originally in his campaign, and the DNA that we had originally as an organization, which is let people do what they want, right? Let people go and do what they want to do in their communities. So I stayed in LA. We had folks in Sacramento, folks in Ventura, San Diego, all across the state, Central Valley, other parts of Northern California. And we kind of went to sleep in some ways. Small pockets of the organization broke off. And it was that sort of dormant gestation period that I think we all went through in the pandemic around really checking in with ourselves, our own self-interest, right? What do I, John, want to see in my own future? And what do I think is going to be important to be able to bring to the state and to the country? And ultimately, the decision was made of, let's try to build something around California UBI. Let's try our hand at creating legislation. Let's try our hand at making this thing work. We're going to build it from scratch. It doesn't exist. And some of the leaders in the state, don't have a lot of understanding of how this works. We got to be our own leaders. And you know what? We hit ourselves against the wall. It didn't go anywhere, Giselle, because we didn't have, and to everybody on the call, because we didn't have the money for it. We didn't have the legs for it. And ultimately, there wasn't that top-down energy, which frankly, realistically, you got to have, right? There's only so much the volunteers can do. And frankly, it wasn't until 739 with Cortese came through that we realized, oh my gosh, there's actually some excitement here. And the thing that happened in LA at the same time, straight off of the SEED project, was 2 LA County supervisors, right? The largest county, Los Angeles, in the country, 10 million people, simultaneously on May 18th passed 2 motions, sister motions. They were both to investigate a Los Angeles County UBI program, guaranteed income program. And both passed on the same day. There was a lot of fanfare in the press. There was a lot of excitement about it. You could log in today to look at the track record, and the public comment, the written comment, is immense, right? You have all kinds of organizations coming in to voice their needs with a distinctly LA flavor around communities facing recidivism and facing justice criminality, right? When I say that, I mean criminality of the justice system, not within the justice system. And so we're looking at how do we harness that energy? And just to sort of summarize, I see you posted the Twitter. I actually never use my Twitter. I have to reverse that and get back in the game. But yes, please, folks, do follow me on social media. I'm on there. And so, but at the end of the day, folks on this call, I want you to walk away with this understanding. And Stacey, maybe I can get more into the weeds around what we're actually doing. But the history of it all is pretty simple. When things fail, when things stop moving in the direction that they were going to go, sometimes the best thing to do is to go into hiding, I'll say, sort of like dormancy, keep your thumb on the pulse, and then watch for the next opportunity. And in the meantime, really, really strengthen your community ties where you are, right? So I ran for neighborhood council in my neighborhood. I got involved with more citywide organizing through Ground Game Los Angeles to build these larger coalitions at the city level. And what that did was, when the opportunity came 12 months later, with the LA pilots and with Cortese's work now moving through the second house, I suddenly had all these doors open for me with some of the biggest organizing communities in Los Angeles, right? So I got plugged into the cash war room for the first time last week, I think it was, but I went into that room with a lot of relationships ready made and an understanding of the power dynamics in Los Angeles and also what motivates people. And so coming into that space, I think I'm really excited. We're really just beginning in LA. There's a lot of exciting opportunities that I don't want to get too long-winded further than I've already been. There's so many specific things to talk about, but basically, stay poised, stay hopeful, talk to people, go outside your comfort zone, and get micro with your impact, because it's that demonstrated success in the micro level that builds trust, and also the deeper understanding of what the people on the ground actually want. Because at the end of the day, you can't buy people off. Ultimately, you can buy momentum, and you can buy media, and you can buy eyeballs, but you can't buy minds, and you can't buy hearts. And it's that trust and that conversation that actually builds success, in my experience.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Your energy is palpable. Love working with you. Love all the things that are coming out of California. It's pretty phenomenal. And I think publicly we see what's coming out of California a lot with Gavin Newsom dog-earing a large, I think $53 million for guaranteed income pilots. Is it that much, or is it 35? Okay. I flipped it. But we hear and see a lot of those, and it feels like almost in California, almost every other day there's a new pilot being announced. But there's also all of the work that you're talking about happening on the ground, and I think that doesn't necessarily always get the same kind of press, but it's important for us as a community to know that that's happening in California, it's happening in Massachusetts and New York and Georgia and and Iowa and Illinois and Florida. Like, it's really pretty massive and spectacular and exciting to know how much work is happening at that micro level, at the community level, city and community level, up to the state and beyond. And so John is illustrating one of dozens and dozens of organizations and leaders across the nation that are picking up that torch and doing the work to collaborate locally to have high impact that is going to help us get closer and closer to that federal side of things. Thank you, John. Okay, Ken and Jenna, let's hear a little bit more about what's going on in Canada and how you guys are navigating some of these same kind of opportunities and same issues that might be coming up, or and how you're making it so that you're getting that momentum building towards the amazing work that comes out of Canada that is always so fun to see covered. And you guys feel so much further along than us on the policy and politician side, but we don't get to hear as much around the grassroots organizing and kind of thought leadership. So we're really excited to have you guys here. So Ken, you, I mentioned at the top when I introduced you, you are with UBI Works. I'd love to understand a little bit more what some of your key initiatives have been over the last year or two, and ultimately like how collaborative work was an important part of some of those key initiatives.
Thank you very much, Stacey. It's a pleasure to speak at NABIG this year. And I just want to start by saying a lot of the progress that has come out of the States, the Stockton pilot data in LA, in other parts of US, have been really important for us in Canada to build our narrative and really just show our activists that basic income works, to corroborate with similar data out of the Ontario pilot, in the Income Project in the 70s. And so it's very important to us. And here at UBI Works, we believe that basic income must be a key election issue. And so to do that, we have to create a visible coalition, a block of activists and voters, including donors who are pushing for basic income and who are equipped with these narratives and talking points from coast to coast, party to party, that our elected officials simply can't ignore. So right from the beginning of my journey in basic income, I've seen how extremely collaborative this work is, and that we're truly standing on the shoulders of giants who've come before us. And we wouldn't be where we are today without the hard work of leading organizations and activists, including the panelists that are here with us today. Back in 2019, I was very lucky to have the opportunity to help co-organize the first Basic Income March in Toronto, which I gotta say, thanks to Stacey and the Income Movement, who've just done a stellar job making a massive impact around the world. Now, this was the first time that we had been doing this, along with 20 plus cities around the world. And we reached out to members from 4 different political parties and asked if they wanted to speak at this march. And 3 of them actually said yes. The 4th couldn't make it, but she was also very supportive of basic income. And these speakers, they were joined by grassroots activists, leaders of our business community, people really from across the political aisle. And it was really a milestone for bringing the movement together. So thank you, Stacey, and to the Income Movement for doing this. And now for me, this really set the tone for the work we would be doing going forward. There was even a couple who drove in, Yang Gang from Rhode Island, to join us because we were closer to them in Toronto than the march happening in New York City. And that was a day when I realized that this movement, it crossed party lines and it crossed literally border lines. And a year later, we'd see even more passionate activists emerge, self-organizing marches across the country and around the world. And the growth was just amazing to see. And so since then, our activist community has grown to include activists in every riding, members of every federal party, And we've launched a number of national activist campaigns, many in conjunction with our partner organizations, with BICN, with BICN's Youth Network, Coalition Canada, all of them. They've been doing just amazing work to push our elected officials and party leaders to make basic income a priority. So for us, national and international cooperation has always been a top priority to show the strength of our movement and its advocates. And I just want to share a few short examples of how this type of coalition building and cooperation has played out since then in the last few years. When the lockdowns started happening around early March 2020, we really saw the world come together to call for emergency basic income. We released a national petition for emergency UBI of $1,000 a month in Canada, and we were drawing inspiration from around the world. Australia, Hong Kong, Japan, Singapore, US, a bunch of other countries were either rolling out or proposing some form of direct cash relief. And in about a week, we had activists in every riding emailing their MPs asking for emergency UBI. Other organizations and individuals across Canada were creating their own petitions. And then a week after that, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit of $2,000 a month was announced, which I think really set a precedent for a permanent basic income, and I hope can serve as a prime example, both for us and for other countries. And then mid last year, a few months later, UBI Works released a recovery UBI proposal for a $500 a month universal dividend as part of a $2,000 a month guaranteed minimum income, along with 8 ways to pay for it, which drew from funding options across the political spectrum. And this campaign was actually inspired by a recovery UBI campaign in UK by our friends over at Basic Income Conversation. And their campaign was co-signed by 110 UK MPs and peers, which is just an amazing, unprecedented coalition. And fast forward a little, towards the end of 2020, UBI Works helped launch a report by the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis, which modeled this recovery UBI proposal, as well as a guaranteed minimum income, which was very similar to the Ontario pilot. And this report showed that basic income can grow Canada's economy more than it costs. It can create jobs, support local businesses, raise wages for workers, while lifting millions of families out of poverty. It was sort of Canada's version of the Roosevelt Institute report that came out in 2017. And that report showed that a UBI of $1,000 a month to every American adult could grow the US economy $2.5 trillion by 2025. So the launch of this report in Canada was truly very collaborative. Number one, we mobilized our community to share the report and highlights with MPs in every riding, and we had regional highlights to share with local representatives and editors. And we couldn't have done this without the help of our partner organizations in Canada, in the US, including Humanity Forward, the Income Movement, and around the world, Basic Income Conversation, who are helping us spread this report by the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis far and wide. And we also had a small team of volunteers who were contacting a group of about 50 Canadian social media influencers who had publicly supported basic income, and we were asking them to help share the key highlights. We held a launch event with some of Canada's top bank economists who endorsed the findings of the report. And then finally, we held briefings with members of multiple parties, including a 30 MP caucus. And then a number of weeks later, one of those MPs, Julie Zerowitz, introduced Canada's first ever bill for basic income in Canada, Bill C-273. And that bill has since gained support from MPs in multiple parties, and it could be going up for a vote as early as September this year. And around the same time we were promoting the bill, we were also asking our community to tell their MPs to support Motion 46, which really was a landmark motion for basic income by MP Leah Gazan, both of which these MPs we heard from earlier. And then several weeks after that, in March, the American Rescue Plan was passed, which meant more direct cash relief for millions of Americans. So it's just incredible just to take a step back and think about how much has happened since the beginning of the pandemic, and really the magnitude of cross-pollination, of collaborative work here across borders around the world is really stunning to see. And if there's one thing that we've learned through all of this, it's that building a coalition of activists across party lines and ridings and getting them to show up and spread these talking points and evidence from research, this can actually translate into legislative action for basic income. And in the past year, we've seen it happen right before our eyes. So we're trying to build a trickle-up economy. And to get there, we have to do trickle-up activism. And I'll just end by saying what really gives me a lot of hope that this push for basic income is only getting stronger is to think about all of these activists here in Canada, in the US, around the world, who are participating in these campaigns and sharing our content, who one day maybe will run for office and they'll win, and then they'll build upon the legacy of our current champions in office. And who knows, there might be a few right here in this room with us.
Awesome. Thank you, Ken. I love hearing, how it's great as you were going through kind of the process over the last year of the coalition building, how many different names and organizations you dropped that were part of this Congress. Like, really cool to be able to. And if people didn't have a chance to see some of those sessions, every single session that has run for this Congress is already available. It's when you click on the link that's associated with the schedule, it'll take you to the recording of it and you can watch those. So if there's any of the things that Ken mentioned that you're like, I didn't get to hear from that person, you can go and look through and find it and not only watch the conversation, the chat and everything gets saved with it. So you can actually see that. Any links that get posted, in the chat, you'll be able to access. So Crowdcast is great at being able to still, even if you missed it, have access to all the great information. So thank you, Ken, so much. Super inspiring and exciting. And we love hearing, we work with UBI Works quite a bit just throughout the year, sharing initiatives and promoting each other's work and, reading the amazing reports that are coming out of Canada that you guys are a part of. And so love that we're continuing that collaboration and partnership across the border. So Jenna, you've been incredibly patient, sitting there listening to all these different ideas and people talking about what's happening. And now it's your turn. I would love to hear a little bit more from you around what coalition building and coordination looks like across the ecosystem in Canada and the role that Basic Income Canada Network is playing towards that movement building.
Thanks, Stacey, and thanks to all of my previous panelists. Yeah, so I think this focus on growth in the movement that a lot of people have touched on is really important, and it's something I kind of continually come back to. I joined the Basic Income Canada Network in 2011, and there was just a handful of us, more than a handful, but really, metaphorically speaking, just a small number. And whether you want to measure it in NABIG attendance or social media followers, or my preferred metrics of my family members now sending me basic income articles instead of the other way around, or hearing basic income being referenced, in passing somebody on the sidewalk. So I think we've hit a couple of tipping points in the movement, and I noticed one around 2016 where there was this explosion of local networks, local groups, and that was true in Canada, and also new country networks were forming at the time I was involved with the Basic Income Earth Network, doing some outreach to new local groups. And then we had this building towards multiple pilots and a lot of excitement and energy there. And I think we then saw another tipping point in 2020 with COVID, which many other people have referenced, so I won't go into that. But I think it's important to acknowledge that, because with that kind of dramatic growth, I think our role and the problems we're facing have shifted. So to me, it used to be this constant battle of raising salience, just getting the issue on, people's radar. And I think we surely still have work to do there, especially politically, but we've come a long way in raising salience. And I think now it is really a problem of coordination of efforts and also amplifying the support that does exist. So to your question of how do we do that? And I think, I'll start from a place of humility saying we're still figuring it out with all of you. I think we're all still figuring out how to do this, because the movement has changed. To me, it feels like overnight. And now in Canada, we're lucky to have 4 national networks that are tremendous. You just heard from UBI Works. Coalition Canada is amazing. So is the Basic Income Canada Youth Network. You've heard from people that are part of those networks throughout the conference too. So I think we have now the pleasure of having co-conspirators and collaborators who are in this space doing great work and who also have respective pieces of the puzzle. And now we're trying to figure out how to do them in complementary ways. So what do we do? Well, I've been reflecting on this and thinking about it. And I think some of the things that have worked so far across this beautiful ecosystem that has emerged since 2016 and then 2020. And I think one of the key things is collaborating and amplifying. So by collaborate, I mean like actual partnerships together on shared projects. And that has been starting and so far has been working really well. It's so hard to choose what to highlight when you have just a few short minutes, but really cool project that's going on is called we shorthanded as the Reset Project, Livelihoods, Income Security, and Community Resilience in a Net Zero Canada is the longer name, but you get the idea. It's really about trying to understand how to achieve dual goals of income security and environmental resilience. And so that's a collaborative project that has people from BICN on it and Coalition Canada and the Energy Mix, and I think even BICYN as well, and some other academics. And so that's a really cool collaborative project that we're actually doing together. And I think more of those are important because we have the strength of all of our respective networks and followers behind us, and we also have complementary skills. So there's that. I think the other important thing that I've noticed is the way we echo each other's work and share each other's campaigns. UBI Works does a lot of campaigns and we like to share them. And, if you look at the work of Coalition Canada, they did some amazing lobbying. And so it helps all of us to be able to say, actually, look, we've met with over 80 politicians and we've had these conversations and built relationships. That helps the whole movement, and it helps the whole movement to demonstrate that a petition has gained, 20,000 signatures, even if it's not your group's petition. So I think amplifying and echoing each other's work is really important. Some other things that I think have worked, having people cross-pollinating in different organizations. So some people from Basic Income Canada Youth Network participating also in the coalition, also joining all of our BIC and board meetings, and on and on. And we have, I think Giselle mentioned something similar. So having kind of like bi-weekly leadership meetings for updates and strategizing helps too with leadership from our national organizations. The last big thing that I wanted to highlight is sort of BICN's emerging role as a convener. And one thing that we've started this year, I guess 2020 was our first launch, but really these national forum meetings that we've had, and they've operated almost as invite-only conferences. And I use the word building in this context, especially because we're still evolving as a national forum. But really the idea is to have a place, a convening space where people across the movement, working either federally or provincially, or other important allies, which Giselle, I think, and Madeline spoke to earlier, about having allied organizations involved. So having faith groups that can come and be part of that national forum. So we've held this meeting space. We've had 3 of them now. And although BICN is the convener, we share hosting duties with all 4 of the national organizations. UBI Works held the last one on strategizing related to the upcoming much anticipated election in Canada. And next time it's the Youth Network that's going to take us through a little highlight on youth activism in Canada and the role of youth across the network. So in summary, I think it's very much building versus built. We're still learning, we're still figuring it out, and growth comes with exhaustion. Growth comes with pain, as any of you who have toddlers, many of my friends know. So I think the louder we are as a movement, the louder the opposition gets. And, it's exhausting, as I heard John say. So I think now is when we need each other the most. And I think we need to, some people need to tag in, other people need to tag out. And we need to keep working together so that we have that resilience as a movement. We can adapt and innovate together quickly. So thanks, Stacey.
I'm so glad, Jenna, that you brought up this, the pain and the exhaustion and the value or kind of importance of the ecosystem. What comes with collaboration is the ability to know that you can tap out because somebody else can, take a step forward and do that work. And I think so often, especially in early phases of building movements, it can feel like if I don't do this, or if our organization doesn't do this, it will not happen. And if it doesn't happen, we lose momentum. And if we lose momentum, this thing might die. And all the work that I just did over the last 12 months is going to tank. And so there's something really, really important, and hearing you talk about what was, one organization is now 4, 5, 6 organizations that are working together collaboratively in the space, is being able to give, if you think about that as partnership and collaboration, it gives more opportunities for deeper focus and being strategic, organizations being able to be strategic on what's going to be most important to that organization to go deep in, because you don't have to hold all of it, but also for people to be able to say like, hey, I haven't really seen my kids for the last 6 months. I need to be able to take a little bit of a break from this. And that somebody else is going to be able to step in because you built those relationships. And not only is there care for the movement and for the idea, but there's care for the people that are making it possible. And I think that we know that those of us who work in the grassroots side know that it's kind of the heart and soul of grassroots volunteerism is the building of the relationships and the building of community, and the support and really kind of love and respect and that comes from that, of just being together in the trenches. But I think it actually does happen across organization lines. It's the same kind of idea. If you're open-hearted and open, kind of open-armed to really true, honest collaboration and partnership, you build those kinds of relationships. You're able to say like, hey, in these convenings, we're not going to be able to do this piece right now. Is anybody else able to? What's going on in other organizations? And that is absolutely about how you make sure that the movement continues to grow without, while recognizing limitations on people's time, energy, budgets, all of those things. So I'm really glad that you brought some of that up, because it's the truth. And I think sometimes we think so kind of rosy about it, that the on the ground, Giselle's been like, we need money. Jenna's like, we need space. We need like support and space for time so that people don't burn out, and the burnout doesn't, negatively impact the overall movement. And I think those things are exactly what collaboration is all about. It's just fantastic to hear you guys. So we're coming towards the last like 15 or so minutes of this session. And I'd love, if you're able to stay, I'd love for you to stay. We're going to open this up to, we've talked about collaboration, we've talked about these kind of pillars and of thought leadership and grassroots and policy and politics. I'd love to bring up a couple of people from our committee to just do a little bit of reflecting on these themes and ideas that we've heard in this session, and reflect on what the last 3 days have looked like, moments where there's some interesting pieces of that we can all go back and watch if we weren't able to be there, but also just to be in community together and have a little bit of a opportunity to think back, because it's been a bit of a whirlwind. Like, there's a lot of sessions. So I want to bring up first Monica Victorova and also Eri Noguchi, who are both members of our committee, who are going to share a little bit of their thoughts and reflections on this last 72 hours. Monica, do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you so much, Stacey. So first of all, I want to thank our panelists today, and thank you, Stacey and Ari, and all of the other organizers and volunteers who've made NABIG 2021 a reality. It's been an incredible privilege to work with you all to deliver this conference and bring together so many diverse voices, from speakers to audience members. In almost every chat during the sessions, and including this one, I've seen participants introducing themselves and where they're tuning in from in Canada, the US, and even internationally. And the excitement is absolutely palpable. So I think what that signals to me is what many of us in the basic income movement already know, which is that support for UBI is at an all-time high. And now really is the moment for us to convert that support into real, tangible policy change and make UBI a reality. As Stacey outlined earlier, the themes for this year, knowledge, activism, and policy, form the roadmap for building a successful political movement. They flow sequentially from one another. We need knowledge in the form of data from pilots, as well as stories from those with lived experiences of UBI. We need activism, a grassroots groundswell of support from organizations like Income Movement, Basic Income Canada Network, USBIG, and many others to surface that knowledge and make it visible to the public. And finally, we need policy, which builds on the activism and knowledge to formalize within our governments the recognition that universal basic income is a human right. I want to spend a little bit of time reflecting on the key lessons that I took from NABIG 2021 relating to each of our key themes. Around the theme of knowledge, I think NABIG provided us with incredible opportunities to learn from experts, activists, as well as each other. Over the last 3 days, we've had 35 sessions, 6 keynotes, and we've featured over 120 speakers. So that's an incredible amount of knowledge transmitted. And I won't be able to highlight it all, but I wanted to touch on one interesting discussion that we had yesterday. On the Friday keynote on data and pilots, there was an interesting debate around what the purpose of UBI pilots serve today. We've had pilots and pilot data for more than 50 years in both the US and Canada. We know that they consistently show that UBI improves the lives of recipients almost immediately, decreasing mental health problems, increasing their ability to meet basic needs, allowing them to leave abusive situations and relationships, and making it more likely that they will spend time on education and finding jobs that they really like. We know that UBI helps those who are most often marginalized in society by racism, ableism, sexism, and other systems of oppression. We know that UBI doesn't cause people to stop working, which is one of the big fears of its opponents. We also know that UBI allows those who care for children, for the elderly, and others to perform what feminists and economists call the unpaid caring labor of society, to have a safety net while engaging in that work. And we know that UBI is a net good. So we ask, what good does it keep to keep proving the same thing over and over again with more pilots? Especially, as Dr. Evelyn Forget remarked, because we can't seem to convince the people who are determined not to believe the data. And I thought how interesting this was, that one of the titans in the field who had single-handedly brought to light the results of the Manitoba pilot worried that these knowledge-producing efforts weren't having an effect. I know they certainly had an effect on me. I became aware of UBI when I read an article on Dr. Forget's work that I found on social media. It was a think piece with a cutesy name along the lines of Canadian experiment proves universal basic income really works. And beyond my anecdotal experience, I know many folks came to UBI because politician Andrew Yang did the hard work of surfacing that knowledge in his 2016 campaign. So I think it's safe to say that producing knowledge about UBI is key, although it's not the only thing that counts. NABIG also provided us opportunities to gain knowledge by learning from each other as we gather together, albeit virtually, through chats during the sessions or in our Kumo Space rooms. I was lucky to be a part of a couple of interesting discussions in Kumo Space, and in one, I heard from a recipient of the stimulus program in the US how big of an impact that check had on her life. She was able to fix her car, do repairs on her home, and have the breathing room to start looking for opportunities that would fit her goals. She said it gave her hope. What struck me about her story is how consistent it is with those of others who've experienced guaranteed income in one form or another. We know it's a game changer for people, and we know that it works. So if we take that knowledge of what UBI is and how powerful it can be for recipients for the broader economy, we can channel it into activism. We heard from many different speakers during the Congress on how we can make activism a reality. I want to highlight one session that was particularly meaningful for me that was led by Basic Income Canada Youth Network, or BICYN, about how youth are key to the UBI movement. Young adults are a powerful voting bloc and also tend to be interested in joining grassroots movements. So harnessing that interest means creating inclusive movements. NBICON outlines some actionable steps on making UBI organizing more accessible to youth and to diverse voices more broadly. They helped us understand how to build safe, empowering, and equitable movements that welcome a plurality of voices. As Amy Baker from SEED said yesterday, changing the narrator changes the narrative, and we must have as many narratives in the chorus of UBI activism as possible. The final theme I want to touch on, and what we all hope to transmute our knowledge of activism into, is policy change. Stacey used a powerful metaphor in one of the sessions yesterday that really struck me. She said that part of what activism does is that it builds a critical mass so that when the door to new policy opens, even a tiny crack, there's a mass of people that are pushing it open and making sure it stays open. One of the things that I noticed in the participant discussions I saw in many sessions is the urgency with which people want to see basic income happen. In a number of sessions, I saw folks asking, how can we get UBI now? How can we get UBI without waiting for federal policy? That critical mass of activism is there, and our job is now to support the leaders driving UBI policy in government and those who are running on UBI platforms. In Canada, these are MPs Leah Gazan and Julie Zarowitz and Senator Kim Pate, who we heard from in our last keynote today. All three are creating legislation, educating their colleagues, and pushing for UBI at the highest echelons of power. In the United States, broad movements at the municipal, state, and federal levels exist, and we heard from the mayors who support basic income at our keynote on Thursday. We saw the power of canvassing in the screening of the documentary Inherent Good, and we heard from Liam at Humanity Forward just earlier today, who described how an Ohio congressperson changed their mind on extending the stimulus packages from a single conversation with a constituent who used the payment to fix her car so she could go back to work. So we're seeing across Canada and the United States that activism is working, and that we have a crucial opportunity now to turn UBI from hope into reality. One last remark that I want to make on policy, and this was in our earlier session today on UBI and tech. I asked the speakers if they see something hopeful and utopian about UBI, a counter narrative to the dystopia that hangs over tech today. And one of our panelists, Albert Wenger, replied that it's no more utopian than the social programs enshrined into law in the 20th century. In closing, I want to thank the speakers and participants of the Congress. We had such an incredible roster of sessions this year. We were running 3 simultaneous sessions for every time slot except our plenaries. And I know that most of us didn't get a chance to watch all the sessions we wanted to. At least for me, this means that I'll be watching the recordings of the session and rewatching favorite sessions long after the conference is done. I encourage everyone who tuned in to keep those recordings links handy and rely on the wealth of knowledge they contain. One of our aims as organizers when we were sitting down to plan out this year's conference was to give the audience actionable insights and to help them answer the question, what do I say to someone who doesn't believe in UBI? Over the last 3 days together, we've responded to the bulk of skeptical arguments. We've learned why UBI is necessary, how UBI works, and how to get involved. We can take that knowledge and excitement for the movement to say, we believe in UBI, and here's why. Thank you.
Woohoo! Thank you, Monica. That felt like a mic drop kind of moment. If we were all on a stage together, I would ask you to drop the mic and walk exit left because that's just fantastic. That was such a great summary. I'm going to hand it over to Ari I know Ari was like, I just want to spend a couple of quick moments. It's a hard act to follow.
That is a very hard act to follow. I wish I had gone first. Oh, well. I apologize. Some of my comments will be a little bit repetitive, but I hope you'll forgive me. Over the past 3 days, I too have marveled at the sheer number and diversity of folks participating in the 19th annual NABIG Congress and the first to be held virtually. I think back to our first 2002 Congress under USBIG. It was held in an auditorium at the City University of New York with 9 panel sessions featuring 30 panelists who made up close to half of the 70 total participants. And as you heard today, we concluded Congress with close to 40 sessions, 120 speakers, and 640 participants. So, wow. You've also heard that this past year, multiple basic income like cash transfer measures were passed by Congress in the United States, and the growth in the number of activists and advocacy organizations, policy and research groups working on basic income issues has exploded. 20 years ago, there was hardly any public discussion of basic income, and today, basic income policies feature frequently in the news, social media, blogs and vlogs, pods and tweets, university and high school classrooms, and even apparently on TikTok, as we heard earlier today, due in no small measure to the coalition building that you just heard about during the past hour. As Monica and Stacey have said, the theme of this year's NABIG Congress is knowledge, activism, and policy. And of course, all these three things are intertwined. In our opening keynote plenary, the featured mayors from MGI focused on knowledge, referencing the mounting evidence that basic income uproots financial insecurity. They focused on activism as they called upon members of the audience to help change the narrative using the statistics and the personal stories to push against the view that poverty and financial precarity are personal failings. And they focused on policy, calling for a permanent basic income at the federal level. During this weekend, that includes Juneteenth, newly declared an official national holiday in the US, the discussions of racial inequities and the consequences of systemic racism informed knowledge, as we heard again what we already know, that Black and Brown and Indigenous people have been disproportionately impacted by poverty, by the pandemic, by the punitive systems of control, monitoring, and exclusion that are endemic to public policies across both the US and Canada. For example, we learned that being BIPOC exacerbates the dangers of being a survivor of intimate partner violence, and there is a high correlation between poverty and the disappearance and murder of Indigenous women and girls. It informed activism, as representatives from the Poor People's Campaign reminded us that the decisive action that ended slavery in the United States was not a proclamation, but rather the emancipation and arming of Black men, which brought an end to the Civil War, and that the movement today must intentionally center the experiences of low-income communities of color. As for policy, several participants stressed the importance of ensuring that a basic income fully reaches the BIPOC community by focusing on implementation protocols, modes of delivery, communities lacking banks and other financial institutions, and protecting those against the loss of other services and subsidies. In the realm of knowledge, we learned that there are 8 pilots and 18 pilots underway and 16 in the design phase. These pilots are taking place in diverse communities, regionally, racially, occupationally, economically. We learned about some of the key findings from Stockton, Manitoba, Ontario, and the Alaska Permanent Fund, and the importance of using these findings, again, to change the narrative. For example, asking what are people doing with their basic incomes instead of does a basic income reduce work hours leads to the discovery that young men are completing high school, going to college, students are spending their evenings and weekends studying, new parents are dedicating more time to providing direct care, and artists are creating art rather than starving. In the realm of activism, we saw how artist activists creatively use their medium to translate what we know into compelling experiences that can pull in a wider community, and even got to see this art in action in the virtual art gallery in Kumo Space and on film with Inherent Good. And in the realm of policy, we heard from the leader of the Canadian Green Party that the current piecemeal social safety net, each targeting specific groups with specific services and resources, inevitably misses large swaths of the population. Turns out government can't anticipate every need across a wide spectrum of people. We also had robust and healthy disagreements, and I want to highlight those. In the realm of knowledge, participants debated whether a universal basic income should replace or supplement parts of the existing social safety net, whether a basic income helps or hurts the feminist cause, especially with respect to their labor market participation. whether a basic income should be funded by an income tax or other revenue sources, whether and at what level there should be a tapering off of basic income for higher income individuals, and whether there is anything new and worthy that we can still learn from pilots, as Monica has highlighted as well. For activism, we heard about the behind the scenes coalition building efforts taking place across various groups while working through different perspectives and priorities related to strategy, form, timing, and even policy ends. And on the policy front, there was a call to embrace intermediate steps, such as a local rollout of a basic income policy at the province or state, or even municipal level, while at the same time fighting to leave no one behind. Like Monica, I also want to acknowledge the robust conversations that were taking place throughout every session in the chat and also in Kumo space. And I hope you will find ways to continue the conversation beyond today. And finally, I want to highlight a few memorable quotes from the last 3 days. These are by no means comprehensive, but perhaps they can inspire some of the slogans as we turn our attention to the basic income marches that are fast approaching and toward which many in this community will now be focusing our energies. So here are a few. Financial insecurity is not a failure of people, it is a failure of policies. Basic income is better than Prozac. Politicians ask us to trust them, so they should trust us. If you keep doing the same thing and it doesn't work, do something different. To change the narrative, we have to change the narrator. Let's make the child tax credit permanent. And finally, the purpose of government is to reduce human suffering and to make life more fair. Clearly, we still have a lot of work to do. Let's get to it. Thanks.
Awesome, Ari. You more than held your own. Yay for you guys. I'm so glad that you guys were able to highlight so many different things, because I was getting a little teary actually as you guys both were talking, because it's been pretty profound what we've all been able to participate in the last few days. And I think the impact is immediate, but it's also long lasting. You know, I love that we're going to be able to go back and dig in, just like Monica said, and see the things that we didn't get to see the first time and see the things that we loved a second and third time. I do want to spend just a quick moment just highlighting some of the, and Ken and Jenna can jump in from the Canadian side of things. A lot of the time after these kinds of events, we all feel excited and inspired and energized, and then we recover. And then a week or two later, we're like, okay, now what? And we want to make sure everybody knows what the now what is, so that if you are inspired like we are, where can you put some energy next? And so, in the US and in Canada and across the globe, the Basic Income March is coming, as well as the International Week of Basic Income, which is the week kind of preceding the march is on the 25th, and the week kicks off on that Monday, which I think is the 20th, the 19th or 20th of September. So those are certainly opportunities. You know, last year, the Basic Income March had over 40 cities participating globally, 25 to 28 here in the United States, and as far and wide as, you know, Berlin, and we had things happening in Australia this year. We have Jakarta, Indonesia on the map, you know, early. We have people across Canada. Last year we had multiple events across Canada happening, and it's been really exciting to not only watch that grow, but watch the week of basic income grow, and the opportunities for really having a week-long celebration. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I'm sure somebody's dropping information. basicincommarch.com is the website. There's places if you want to do something in your city, you can get yourself on the map. If you're interested in just learning more about it, you can reach out to I'm trying to think, maybe info@incomemovement.com is a good email to put out there, so we're not putting somebody's personal email on there, but we can let you know a little bit more about what the plans are for that week. This summer, many of the city organizers want to start work in their communities over the summer to get people excited and jazzed and ready for the march happening in September. So there's going to be some some work happening around kind of a coalition of summer events that we'll have a campaign around that'll be up in the next week or two. So we'll share that, certainly share it out with everybody who registered for this so that people know about it. And of course, we also have in the United States, we have a coalition of organizations came together immediately following the pandemic hitting. We created a website and a series of actions that's always being updated at a website called bailoutthepeople.com. Fund for Humanity is on there, Income Movement, Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, Economic Security Project, Humanity First Movement, and beyond are all involved in that. Those are opportunities to sign petitions, to send letters to your Congress members, letters to the editor, live events. We had Shake Up Congress car parades last summer. It's really a kind of one-stop shop for the legislative push, the pressure on Congress to keep this going. A lot of what we're starting to shift towards, as many people have referenced, is making the child tax credit permanent here in the United States. We've got a limited time right now that it's going to be rolling out, but we really want to make sure that while we have our window of people that might in our Congress and at the White House that might be interested in passing this, we want to get it passed to be permanent. So a lot of effort through the end of this year will be going towards that. Ken and Jenna, do you have things that you want to, I know you started to hit on some of those a little bit earlier, but what can Canadians keep their eye on that's coming out over the next several months?
Well, a lot of the ones I was going to mention have been posted in the chat, so just some brief highlights. We've got our next National Forum meeting coming up on June 30th, so many of you have already been tuned in and invited to that. And there will be some election strategizing and ways to get involved in a volunteer capacity, I think, coming out of some of those conversations. But there are also volunteer opportunities with each of the organizations that we referenced, so I put their links there. And then the other things, the BN Congress is coming up in August, hosted by our friends in Scotland, although it will be virtual. So again, nice and easy for people to attend. And I saw the link go in there. So that's August. And then, of course, we have some Canadian events happening for Basic Income Week as well, and the March that's already been highlighted. So don't hesitate to get in touch. We'll find a good place for you to land and to volunteer in one of our many places. And thank you so much, Stacey, for this opportunity.
Awesome. Ken, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, thanks so much for that. Yeah, and everything Jenna said, there's a few major things happening this year. In September, there's a possibility of Bill C-273 going up for vote as early as that, because it just entered second reading Monday this week, and the first hour of it has happened, and MPs are already beginning to debate Canada's first piece of legislation ever. And a second hour, the second of 2 hours of debate for second reading, will be scheduled at some time in the future, but Parliament goes on recess between June 24 to September 20th. So what that means is for the next several months, we have an opportunity to share talking points and help educate our MPs about why basic income works, right? I think about something that Julie Zerowitz, the sponsor of this bill, said earlier in her session, where she said she echoed what Leah Gazan was saying about the importance of education. The challenge here is in educating people about basic income, because at the end of the day, we already have the proof that this works. We already know that we can pay for it, but this is really about a cultural change and changing people's minds, right, about basic income. So, and the other big thing is that there's talks of a looming election possibility, which could interrupt this bill. And every election is another chance for us to make basic income a key election issue. I think one of the turning points in the last maybe, and I think this, Andrew Yang did a big part to change this, is that sitting officials, parties, and media began to realize that the topic of basic income brought eyeballs. It brought money, it brought potentially votes. And this is more and more sitting officials and parties are beginning to realize this. So when when there's an election happening, then email the candidates, ask the candidates where they stand on basic income. And if they give an answer that's anything other than yes, then you have to share the evidence with them and say, well, why do you think so, right? And try to debunk maybe some of the misconceptions that they hold. And if they support basic income as a candidate, then they need to be given the confidence and the talking points and narratives to really run confidently on basic income. And I think that sort of the next phase of basic income advocacy really will be potentially at the ballot. And when you're emailing these officials or these candidates, put the evidence in the subject line. Because even if they don't open the email, they would have maybe seen the headline, right? Any chance we can get to and I want to echo what Liam of Humanity Forward said earlier about we need to reach people who don't accept basic income yet, right? Like we can preach to the choir all we want, but we need to reach people who just think, like the same misconceptions that have been lingering for decades and decades, right? We need to reach them. And the other thing is there's already lots of excitement for the Basic Income March in September, which follows Basic Income Week. So we welcome you to join us there.
Awesome, thank you. And one of the things that's also in the United States, we're going to be doing a 2-day festival in Nashville this year as part of our week of basic income with comedians and musicians live streamed for everybody to be able to participate in, and experts in the basic income community, film screenings, panel discussions, artists, murals, kind of highlighting the art of Nashville, which is nothing but abundance in that space. So really excited to be able to share that with you all as we get closer to that week of basic income. We'll make as much accessible and possible for the national and global community to be able to kind of link into. So we're coming up to the very end. I want to thank everybody here that's on the stage currently for the conversation that we just had and the work that you are doing that is amazing in its collaboration and partnership. I also want to bring up onto the stage all of our amazing committee that has made this possible, and our tech support, Hannah and Megan, and all of the people who are moderating these events. We might have a very full screen, but we want to have a full screen because we want to demonstrate this is what it takes to make something like this happen. It takes dozens of people who care, who are passionate to come together. And many of everybody is working behind the scenes. This isn't about, kind of being front and center on stage, but just making sure that we can make it all happen. So these are all amazing people who have been working for the last several weeks and months to make it possible for us all to be here together. So thank you, Giselle, John, Ari, Sheila, Mike, Hannah, Larry, Megan, Erica, Kimberly, Chelsea, Annie, Monica, and so many more. Waleed is not here. There's several people who weren't able to make it this late. I know that Rosario was on for a moment, and others, and they aren't. And Sheila's puppy is there. Kimberly's puppy is there. We have Chelsea's. They've helped inspire and bring us joy when we're down in the trenches with our sleeves rolled up. Lovely to see. Hello, Rosario. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for sticking around for a few extra moments. Mike is going to actually take us out, and we do have a Kumo space. The Kumo space is still open. So Mike's going to close it out as the host.
I'll be very brief. Again, I want to second the thanks to everybody you see on the screen here for the hard work that they've put in, both in this session, which was so inspiring. I'm going away really pumped myself, and for the whole Congress. And thank everybody who's been here in attendance. When you go away from here, I encourage you to keep the conversation going. Join our organizations. It's free, and we need your help. So all the logos are on the page. You can just connect with those and sign right up. And the conversation will continue over in Kumo space. There is one last bit of business I want to ask you to do. Maybe you can do it right here at your computer. We have a survey to get feedback from you. We want to do this again next year. We want to do it bigger and better, and we need your impact, your feedback. So it's a very short survey. You can do it probably in 2 minutes. So I hope you will do that now or when it is convenient to do so. And with that, I will simply say we hope to see you